Good evening, everyone. Michael here with the eighth installment. It's part eighth installment of our reading of Martin Booth's Cannabis History. And we're on chapter 5. Right off the bat, chapter 5. It's called Myths and Murderers. Myths and Murderers. Okay. Around 1271 or 1272, Marco Polo, the renowned Venetian merchant adventurer, was on his way through Persia en route for Cathay when he came upon a story told by travelers in that region. 25 years later, he recounted it in his book, Il Milione, better known today as The Travels of Marco Polo. The story concerned a remote area ruled by one they called the Old Man of the Mountains, whose followers were notorious for their ruthlessness. According to Marco Polo, they had been in existence since the middle of the 11th century, so the 1000s, right, AD, and there was not an Arab leader who did not go in mortal dread of them. The disciples of this leader were kept loyal to their master by the promise that, were they to die whilst in his service, they would assuredly go to paradise. To strengthen their resolve, the Old Man of the Mountains gave initiates to his following a preview of what it would be like in paradise by maintaining a fabulous garden within his mountain stronghold. And try to picture this. In this pleasure ground, exquisitely beautiful houris wandered ready to fulfill any desire. The fountains ran with milk and honey, and the flowers were beyond compare. However, it was said, to enter this fabled place, the would-be acolyte was first given a powerful drug, and only when unconscious allowed in. Before leaving, he was again drugged. After their induction, the initiates were given a solid Islamic education, but were also taught the arts of murder, killing anyone whom their master commanded be put to death. Before going into battle, they apparently partook of the same drug to increase their courage. The drug was hashish. The veracity of Marco Polo's writings has long been suspect, yet the story has stuck, enhanced and exaggerated as the centuries have passed. The legend of the Old Man of the Mountains has become nothing short of unassailable fact, and his followers, notorious as much for their merciless cruelty as their gargantuan appetites for hashish, have become a byword for brutality. Even the name by which they came to be known derived from the drug it was alleged they took. They were called, can you guess? The Hashashins, or the Hashashin. They are now known as the Assassins, and the word assassin and assassinate comes from this group, led by the Old Man of the Mountains, the Hashashin. The truth is somewhat different, he says, though. See, that's the legendary part. You have these, stories, and that's part of history, but then you kind of you gotta dissect and try to figure out, well, was that an account? Was that like a historical story? Or was it like a legend, that became like really exaggerated or whatever? So, this is what he says. Within a century of the foundation of Islam by Muhammad in 622, the religion had divided into two branches. Well, we know there's more to it than that, but the two main branches, the Sunni and the Shiite, each containing a number of sects, often at theological or ideological loggerheads with each other. One such sect, a schism of the Shiite branch of Islam, was known as the Nizari Ismaili. It was founded around 1090 by Hassan ibn Sabah, a famous Islamic dissident who was born in 1050 in the city of Qom, south of Tehran, and educated in the orthodox thinking of Islam. Tradition has it sharing the same teacher as the famous Islamic writer Omar Khayyam. His father was a Shiite Muslim from Kufa, a city on the Hindia tributary of the Euphrates in southern Iraq. The family claimed to be of Yemeni extraction and descended from that Himyarite monarchs of southern Arabia. With his sect, Hassan ibn Sabah intended to politically promote the Ismaili cause across the Arabic world, which meant giving support to the Ismaili Fatimid rulers of North Africa. They took their dynastic name from Fatima, the Prophet Muhammad's daughter, Fatima, from whom they believed they were descended. Through this bloodline, they believed they were consequently the guardians of the true faith. His politico-religious stand put Hassan ibn Sabah at odds with the rest of Islam. He was vilified and regarded as a dangerous renegade, cunning, ambitious, determined, and exceedingly zealous. He allegedly had two of his own sons put to death, one for drinking wine and one for an alleged murder. Okay. Yet even his adversaries allowed that he was a highly intelligent and learned Islamic philosopher and theological scholar whose every action was reasoned. His philosophy was known as the New Propaganda, through which he asserted that Islam had become decadent and needed to return to the true path. Let's see. So, we're in the 1000s here. It was only 400 years old, this religion, roughly. So, only through unquestioning faith and obedience could salvation be found. A charismatic preacher, he soon acquired a dedicated following. With his sect established, Hassan ibn Sabah required a base from which to operate. He chose the castle of Alamut in the remote, inaccessible Elburz Mountains in northern Persia, about 45 kilometers northwest of the town of Qazvin. Perched on a narrow 400-meter-long ridge, it commanded a cultivated valley about 50 kilometers long and 5 wide. Okay, imagine this. So you have this thing perched on 400-meter long ridge in this place. So that's big right there. It's along that ridge, 400 meters. But then it commanded, so it's looking over and in and down into a cultivated valley right there. About 50 kilometers long. That's about 25 miles roughly long, and 5 wide, roughly 2.5 miles wide. So it's a very big, large valley. Okay, That's a large enough valley that, you could have a whole city in that size of a place. And there are examples of that very situation. Cities and valleys of that size all over the world. So, access to the castle was by a precipitous and convoluted path. uh-huh. Once ensconced in the castle, Hassan ibn Sabah set about improving it. The fortifications were extended and strengthened, trapment canals built for water, and an irrigation system constructed for nearby fields. According to Edward Berman, the author of a definitive study of the assassins who visited Alamut in the 1970s, it is likely that some sort of gardens were also laid out, for they played an important part in Persian noble life. These gardens were not, however, the grandiose paradise of Marco Polo's dubious chronicle. The 1950s British expedition to Alamut and several other nearby assassin strongholds found no area in the ruins large enough to hold even a small garden. But the castle had been substantially damaged by earthquakes in 1485, 1639, and 1808. So it is not inconceivable that land may have been lost in these or covered by rubble. Well, very true, especially like in a valley, because a valley is, it's like, a valley's usually always going to be kind of related to a fault line. As a fault line is like, a mountain range beside or along it, and then the valley's, right there. So, possible. Or they're not looking in the right place for this, for what Marco Polo described. Okay. They're looking at the best guess of the place that we think matches up, but it might not be. Could be, in a number of various places, probably in the Arab and Persian world. Okay, it's not a small area. Even Iran itself is pretty large. Yeah. So, okay, where were we? I get off. Yeah. The occupants of the castle lived an ascetic existence, but despite the hardships of life in the mountains, Hassan ibn Sabah continued to gather followers and acquire more castles across Persia, mostly to the north and east of the Dasht-i-Kavir, or the Great Salt Desert. I'll see, there you go. There'd be other places that he could have had. With the expansion of his power base, Hassan ibn Sabah started to meet increased territorial opposition. Anyone who was not sympathetic to the Nizari Ismaili cause faced death, for in Hassan ibn Sabah's eyes, this made them false prophets of which Islam should be cleansed. He's a zealot. That's the very definition of a religious zealot right there. One means of ridding society of this blight was secret assassination. Such judicious or religious, common judicial murder was commonplace in the Islamic world. Homicide being a well-tried political modus operandi. Hassan ibn Sabah, however, developed this into a method of killing that chilled the blood in his enemies' veins. Knowing his preaching alone could not make more than a dent in the armor of Orthodox Islam, he devised a system by which a small and dedicated unit of men could effectively strike at and overwhelm a superior enemy. I like guerrilla warfare, reminds me of. In effect, he instituted a sort of Islamic elite commando force. Many considered it a terrorist organization. Interesting. This might be the first, arguably Islamic terrorist organization that he ran. We're talking the 1000s here. folks. AD. So yeah, pretty, very ordered, and he was like having his own military going on. The first step was to organize his disciples into ranks. I mean, it was a cult, but it was probably a large and powerful, formidable cult group, that scared the bejesus out of the rest of the Arab world and the Persian world at the time. As you'll see here, I think. Well, I've read about this group before, and I have other book or two that has them in it. So, yeah, they're pretty infamous now. I mean, the very word assassin comes from this group. So, but not as many people know who led the group and more about it. Well, this is what this is. The first step was to organize his disciples into ranks. Okay, with himself as Grand Master, of course. He structured those beneath him in 6 grades, the last being the Fidai, F-I-D-A, Fidai, I don't know, meaning the devoted ones. The Fidai were the foot soldiers who, without consideration to their own personal safety or life, would unswervingly carry out their orders. If necessary, they would bide their time for months until the moment was ripe, studying their victims' lives in intricate detail. To die in the pursuit of their duty was considered a privilege and would ensure entry into paradise. This dedication to the task and fanatical lack of fear for death made the Fidai feared throughout Islam. And throughout Islam means a good chunk of the world at that time. A good chunk of the, old world, as we call it now, at that time. By that time, by the 1000s, Islam was in North Africa, pretty sure. It was all over. And it was a large area. Probably a larger area as far as area goes than Christianity at that time. So yeah, it was impressive. The Arab world at that time, at his time, and for all of Islam to be in kind of fear of this guy and this group that he commanded. Yeah. Their first victim was Abu Ali Hassan ibn Ali, or Nizam al-Mulk, the vizier of the Seljuk Sultanate, who was killed on October 14th, 1092, by a Fidai dressed as a Sufi. And that's, in our previous chapter, we read about the Sufi sect of Islam, and yeah, how it's completely opposite of this cult group, this Hashashin group. And so you can see there, both groups were using cannabis in different ways, and had a whole different mindsets about everything and their religion and their outlook, And the Sufis are still around, and this group is long extinct, but may have come back in other forms later on. Anyway, but yeah. So it's interesting, the group actually hid, or the assassin hid as a Sufi, costumed as a Sufi to do the deed. Just shows you, they were against Sufism, this group. They wanted to, make them look bad, He was followed, so this guy, dressed as a Sufi, this assassin, he was followed by a long line of prominent, the guy that was killed, Abu Ali Hassan ibn Ali, was killed by this guy dressed as a Sufi. He was followed by a long line of prominent Islamic rulers, advisors, officials, and even priests who had attacked Nizari Ismaili teachings or sought to repress the sect. with every killing. The Fidai, the term came to mean killer in Nizari Ismaili circles, saw themselves as religious soldiers earning their place in heaven. Their enemies regarded them as fanatical criminals. As the reign of terror escalated, the Nizari Ismaili extended their activities into Syria. They're pretty powerful at this time, where their main opponents, the Seljuk, were gaining influence. So, Hassan ibn Sabah sent missionaries into this new enemy territory to spread his doctrine. Perhaps to his surprise, many came over to his side, not merely because they agreed with his teachings, but because they saw in the Nizari Ismaili a force that could rid them of Seljuk rule and help them combat another, potentially more dangerous foe that was threatening Islam, the Christian Crusaders. See the time. We're in the 1090s or in 1100, early 1100s. There you go. The Christian Crusades. So isn't that something? That actually made people that were more moderate Islam, Muslims, want to join this what they saw as a powerful force of Islam. That because they're so, I don't even know. They're like they said, like a special ops force commanded by this guy in the mountains, Hassan ibn Sabah. So, yeah. Hassan ibn Sabah died in 1124. That's the story anyway. But his sect continued under new leadership, consolidating its power base in Syria and launching a new wave of assassinations. So, unlike most cults that die out when their leader dies, this one kept going. And it's like the title, his original title ended up kind of like passing down. So you have through time kind of a title of the old man of the mountains begin. I think from what I recall about this group. So that was a ongoing thing, and it actually became legend to some people outside of this group. Legends grew, exaggerated, whatever. That the old man of the mountain still lived. It was the original one that kept going, and he was actually like he got to over 100 years old, 150, 180, something, even 200 years old. That they, it was legend that he just became that way from the outsider's perspective. Infamous, and maybe even part the story of, or the idea of Dracula or vampire, has something to do with this era and this group, because the old man of the mountains kind of looked at like that, sort of like as time went on, and it may have even maybe the next ones, dressed like him, had the same kind of look, same kind of dress, and they same uniform, whatever, and maybe even masked up and had the same mask. Who knows? Same crown or whatever he wore. This crazy mountain stronghold. But he's a very interesting group because he had princes and sultans, kings, queens, their whole families just scared shitless. That they would just all of a sudden be knifed by somebody close to them, even. And some of his assassins would stay with the targets and get their trust, gain their trust, like as a servant or something, and or just a friend or a neighbor, and they would or common whatever, and they would become friendly with them, and the assassin would bide their time. And yeah, get to know the person, like over days and weeks and months and years. Maybe in some cases, a few years in some cases. Then all of a sudden, that person you thought you knew, he's got a big old dagger hidden under his garments, and he's right next to you. You were trusting him with your life for years. Why would tonight be any different? And then he's done. And then, yeah, the assassin usually would get killed. They wouldn't. Maybe they tried to escape sometimes, but like they said, it's like a privilege to die doing their thing for Hassan ibn Sabah. So, yeah, they would just, die there. Anyway, yeah, crazy stuff, huh? And they were successful about a lot of these assassinations. Maybe more so than history even records. Because it could even become an embarrassment to some of these sultans and their families and their power bases all over the Arab world. And yeah, even after 1124, after he was gone, like I said, there's other people that continued on, like they were saying here. So let's keep going. More and more. So he died, but the Syria thing, happened. The greatest of the Nizari Ismaili leaders in Syria was Rashid ad-Din as-Sinan, who ruled over their affairs from his castle at Masyaf from the early 1160s until his death in 1192. Rashid ad-Din as-Sinan referred to himself as Sheikh al-Jabal, the mountain chief. And it was from this that the moniker, the Old Man of the Mountains, arose. Okay. Cemented in time into the popular consciousness by the use of the title by other and subsequent leaders. Well, like I was saying, continued on. They kept that fear going too, all over. Fear, the elites feared. I mean, he didn't, and that's one thing you could kind of knock in favor a little bit, I must say, because subjectively, because they seem to only focus on the elite, the royals and the elite, the power elite of these places all over, different places, but. Yeah, that was kind of the goal. It was because it was power. It was all of a power move, power grab, power move. So that's what they did. But it's not. So I guess it's not any kind of. It's not like they were compassionate towards the poor just because they didn't target them. They were, but they pretty much seem to only target the wealthy and the elite and the powerful. So because that's how they gain theirs. So not like they were the good guy. It's not like they were Robin Hood. That's not the same thing. But, they were targeting the upper echelon of society all around. So it was whilst under the leadership of Rashid al-Din as-Sinan, I don't know if I'm saying that right, that the Nizari Ismaili came into contact with the newest enemies of Islam, the Crusaders. Indeed, it was the Crusaders who gave wide currency to the nickname the Old Man of the Mountains. It was also they who spread the term from which the name assassins derived. This they gleaned from Muslims opposed to the Nizari Ismaili, who used various derogatory terms for them, such as Hashishia or Hashashin. From their first encounters, the Crusaders learnt to respect and fear the Hashashin. It was under Rashid ad-Din as-Sinan's orders that the German contender for the crown of the Kingdom of Jerusalem, Conrad of Montferrat, was murdered in Tyre in 1192. The Fidei, who carried out the commission, spending months disguised as Christian monks, and living with the Crusaders until such a time as they saw their opportunity. Sneaky that way. Something. Also, although the French, German, and British crusaders were in a permanent state of mutual political upheaval, the English king, Richard Coeur de Lion, Richard Lionhearted, was unjustly accused of having been involved in the killing. The death of Conrad unnerved them and served to considerably bolster the reputation of the Hashashin. Chroniclers of the crusade wrote at length of the Islamic sect with its dissident views, ruthless terror tactics, and strange mythical leader. The legend of the assassins was born, and a new verb, to assassinate, entered the dictionaries of Europe. Yet, even with their efficient killing apparatus, the assassin days were numbered. In 1256, okay, jump forward a bit here, the Mongol invader Hulagu, a grandson of Genghis Khan, conquered Persia, overrunning the castle at Alamut, as well as several other neighboring assassin strongholds, and establishing his own Ilkhanid dynasty. At the same time as the Mongols were sweeping through Persia, Al-Malik As-Salih Ayyub, the Mamluk ruler of Egypt and successor to the Kurdish general Saladin, was attacking the Crusaders and taking control of Syria. Between these two invaders, the power of the assassins was broken. The Nizari Ismaili deteriorated into a minor heretical sect, split in the 14th century, 1300s, by a schism from which it never recovered. The Assassin's Library, which had been founded by Hassan ibn Sabah and kept at Alamut, was destroyed, losing to both history and Islamic scholarship most of the truths about his sect. See, we would have known so much more. Consequently, whatever is known about the assassins has been sourced primarily from records compiled by their opponents. See, there is a chance, because we do not have their own side of the story, there is a chance that they aren't as bad as the reality of them wasn't as nefarious as what their opponents paint them as in their histories. Okay, gotta always consider that, especially, and that's a red flag. It's like a red flag going up when we don't have their side of the story anymore. It's just gone. You know, that makes me question. That makes me wonder. It makes me skeptical about how righteous and good the other side was, that we have the information about this group from, and we don't have their own voices about their own side of the story. So, yeah, always think about that. Not saying they were good, I'm just saying we might not know how bad, how good they really were, because all we have is the tellings of their enemies. You know, of course they would paint them in a bad way. You know? Okay. Always two sides of the story, my mama always said. At least two sides of the story, she said. I met my great-grandmother on my mom's side. I'm blessed to have many years growing up with her still around. She was born in 1907, and she died in the year 2000. So she was 93, and so I got to spend 19 of my years with her, and yeah, I'm so glad I had the time I had with her, and that she lived close by enough, often, mostly, most of the time she was close by with my Uncle Mike that took care of her. And my Uncle Mike was adopted by my great-grandmother, by his grandmother, okay? When he was little little baby. My grandmother, my Uncle Mike's birth mother, gave him up to her mom, my mamaw, Uncle Mike's grandma. He called her Mamaw too. She was Mamaw to everybody. And he ended up taking care of her for her whole life, or the rest of her whole life. And lived with her, took care of her. They moved around. He bought and sold properties and took care of her. Was his main concern. And then, but he would buy and sell the houses they would live in, and he got really good at that and got lucky sometimes with one or two that didn't go as good as he wanted, and then others did. And they moved all around. They moved mostly around Hopkinsville, Kentucky, where I grew up, and then for a little while here and there, they jumped down to Florida for a couple of years here and there, and then come back and then sell that one and come back up. So yeah, they liked Sarasota area, Florida, Port Charlotte, Florida. That's mainly where he had houses, various ones, many there, different times. He did a whole series of them down there for like 3 years, and then they came back, and then they went back and came back, So it was like that. So, but I still got a lot of time with Memo. And she always said there's always at least two sides of every story. She's something. Something else. Sharp as a tack, kept her mind all the way to the end. Never got dementia. I mean, she got a little bit senile. She's 93, so she got somewhat senile the last couple of years or so. But I'll tell you, yeah, she was there. She was all there. She's something. I learned a lot from just her presence in my life and being able to do things with her and with Uncle Mike a lot. So, yeah, and they're both in heaven now. So, anyway, may they both rest in peace. Be together. So, back to the story. It's always two sides, remember? And we don't have their side, okay? It was maybe conveniently deleted. Thrown down that memory hole like in 1984, okay, in the book. All right. Okay, their opponents, particularly medieval Sunni scholars, hostile to Shiite philosophy in general. So the Sunnis wrote about them, which they considered heretical. And of course, and that of the Nizari Ismaili in particular, the term Hashishiyah being first applied to the Nizari Ismaili in a pamphlet denouncing them in Cairo in 1123. That said, several other derivations for the word assassin have been proposed. One suggests it comes from the Arabic verb hassas, to kill, Hassass. Another that it derives from Hassan ibn Sabah's name, but these are now generally believed false. It is not unfair to say that the assassins were highly motivated, skilled, and trained merciless political killers. Yeah, very ordered, Anyway, yet there's one fundamental puzzle about them that has never been satisfactorily answered, and is of considerable importance to the history of cannabis. Despite their name, it is by no means certain if they ever used hashish at all. Thinking that's something that's uncertain. That's how little we know about them. Maybe if we had their side of the damn story, we would know. Anyway, there have yet to be found any contemporary Islamic texts that state that Nizari Ismaili categorically used hashish. They may have done so, as Berman suggests, hashish was an important part of Persian mysticism, in which it was used as a soporific, which intensified the religious experience. They were also influenced by Sufi theology, so may well have adopted the Sufi use of hashish as a means toward attaining visionary experience. Yet this is no conclusive proof, even of an unpartisan nature. Furthermore, they were ascetics and likely to shun such vices. Well, we really don't know that about them. Even if they did use hashish, it cannot, as was believed in their time and has been perpetuated ever since, have been in order to raise their courage and excite their battle rage. Okay, here we go again, author. Hashish does not produce any mental state that would incite either violence or brutal murder. No, it doesn't. But it can help with concentration, strategic thinking in the moment, maybe dexterity and reaction time. And those things would come in handy in a battle. Okay? Author's great, but he doesn't know everything. Okay? And I don't either. I'm just saying, at least I know that much. Anyway, very subjective. Okay, subjective stuff there. There is simply no historical basis for the assumption that the assassins were driven to assassinate by being in a hashish-induced state of mind. Okay, quite the reverse. Any Nizari Ismaili who was under the influence of hashish would have been a distinct liability to a military operation. Again, subjective. We just don't have enough info about this. As J. Mandel wrote in an article entitled Hashish, Assassins and the Love of God in the journal Criminology in 1966, religion leads to assassinations, not hashish. The supposed hashish-induced visions of paradise are as responsible for assassinations as the religiously fortifying drinking of wine and eating of wafers are responsible for the bloody crusades. He wrote, close quote. The truth is, the assassins have been given a reputation that they did not really deserve, and through them, so has hashish. Whatever misinformation was promulgated by Sunni propagandists was embellished by Western chroniclers who seem not to have appreciated the fact that the assassin's name was abusive. Nor did they understand the position of the Nizari Ismaili sect in the political structure of Islam. Being largely ignorant of the Muslim religion and always eager to tell a good tale, they came to present a grossly inaccurate picture. The Crusaders found it hard to understand how the Fidai could be so fanatically devoted. To try to rationalize this, they assumed the devotion was drug-induced. Storytellers, Marco Polo amongst them, picked this up. The drug, because it was prevalent in society, was assumed to be hashish. Furthermore, the Fidai, daring and made a great impression upon the Crusaders, who admired their valor and dedication, even if it was drug-inspired. And it was this and their loyalty that was first reported back in Europe, where the word assassin became a metaphor for loyalty unto death and not an act of bloody murder. Interesting. Well, we're just going to continue because there's only a little bit left. So it's going to make it longer and continue, finish the chapter. Okay. Well before the Crusades were over, the legend of the assassins was gathering pace. It was said that the Fidai were so loyal that they would commit suicide if ordered by their master. The French nobleman Henry of Champagne, whilst on a visit to Syria in 1194, was said to have witnessed two Fidai throwing themselves off a tower on the command of their leader. like pointing up. I think it's in a Conan movie. Conan number 2, the Conan Barbarian number 2. James Earl Jones is the cult leader in that, the snake cult thing. James Earl Jones. He points up and then they just fall off. That's exactly where that came from. That and that movie came from this story about these guys. mm-hmm. Yeah, so two Fidei throwing themselves off a tower on the command of their leader. His report only made the assassins seem all the more exotic back in Europe. And yeah, that was remembered, and it became a scene in a Hollywood movie hundreds of years later. Isn't that crazy? That hashish is not specifically mentioned by Marco Polo, but only by subsequent chroniclers. That whatever drug was used was given for entry into the Garden of Paradise and not fed to operatives on active service, and that it was a soporific, not a stimulant, has been conveniently overlooked. The fact, had anyone stopped to think about it, that the drug induced stupor and produced visions of paradise, suggests it was far more likely to have been an opiate, widely known to have such effects. Yet this did not make a good, intriguing tale. Unknown hashish did. The exotic unknown, right? As if this is not sufficient to cast doubt upon the story, it must also be remembered that Marco Polo did not actually write his tale down himself. He dictated his book to a prisoner called Rusticiano, with whom he was sharing a cell in Genoa after the ship he was sailing with was captured by the Genoese in 1298. Over the preceding years, Polo had often recounted his tales, and Chinese whispers like may well have ornamented it. Those coming after him certainly did. The 1818 translation by William Marsden, considered to be the most accurate, actually mentioned opium as the drug involved. And there you go. It is not improbable that Marco Polo also borrowed facts from other writers to spice up his own narrative, for he was not the first to mention the assassins, variously known also as the Hysacenes, Axasine, Assassis, Axini, and Assassini. Okay, I tried. One of the earliest, possibly the first, accounts of the assassins, referred to as the Hasicini with an H, like at the beginning, it's weird, is found in a document sent by one of Frederick Barbossa's envoys to Egypt and Syria in 1175. The envoy stated they were based in the region between Damascus and Aleppo, living in mountain strongholds. He then continued by mentioning their obedience, ruthless activities, the fact that their master maintained a fabulous garden, and that he showed this to his followers after having drugged them. This story was the basis for many to come. 8 years later, William, Archbishop of Tyre, mentioned the Assassini in his History of Matters Done in Foreign Parts, one of the first chronicles of the Crusades. James de Vitry, Bishop of Acre, in the early 13th century, in the early 1200s, studied secret societies and referred to the Nizari Ismaili in Syria as Assassini. Several decades later, Willem von Reisbrock, a French Franciscan friar who doesn't sound French, traveled to China, applied the terms Haxasines and Aksassins to the Nizari Ismaili in Persia. By the time Marco Polo told his possibly spurious story, knowledge of the assassins was widespread in Europe, and the meaning of the name was metamorphosed. By 1300, it no longer referred to a Muslim sect or even generically to a blindly loyal disciple. It now meant a pitiless and brutal murderer. Dante Alighieri, 1265 to 1321, the most famous writer of the Renaissance, was well aware of this process of linguistic evolution. In Inferno, one of the books of his Divina Commedia, Canto 19, line 50, he wrote, it's in Italian, so here's the other translation. My position was like that of the friar who confesses to being a perfidious murderer, condemned to death by being buried alive. Close quote. One of the most horrendous methods of medieval execution applied only to the most heinous of crimes. When Philip VI of France was considering mounting a crusade the year after Dante's death, he commissioned an advisory report before deciding to act. The advisor, a priest called Brocardus, highlighted the danger of the assassins, whom he described as nothing short of contract killers, not mentioning their religious or political background. Where he was concerned, they were just mercenaries. So it was that, gradually, by association with the assassins, about whom little was really known, and who had been inaccurately tarred with a barbarous brush by their enemies, hashish came to be considered a drug capable of generating bedlam, undermining society, creating chaos, and turning otherwise merciful men into merciless murderers. And this grossly erroneous myth has been perpetuated ever since, right up to the modern day, by those who would proscribe or prohibit anything to do with cannabis. That's the end of the chapter 5. Yeah, might as well. Once I got into it, I kind of remembered that this was likely the whole thing about the hashashin and the old man of the mountains, Hassan ibn Sabah. In other versions, got another book up there, has another account of them that I read, more like from original account, or older account. And that it's Hassan ibn al-Sabah. So, but this author didn't put the al in there. So, Hassan ibn al-Sabah is how I memorized his name years ago when I first read about this group. And yeah, the stories from them and the whole propaganda around them and everything around them, legend, exaggerations and all, and yeah, the misidentification of the of the drug, if there was a drug that they used, and no evidence that pot had anything to do with them, really. And but look how it all wove together later, and that was an example. It's kind of like the first reefer madness, or yeah, it was a reefer madness situation that, of course, that could be used as propaganda and demonization of the cannabis plant. Yeah. Silly. Yeah. So, we're going to go chapter 6 in the next video. This is the first video we actually read a whole chapter in. So, yeah, it's a little longer, but oh well. Got it done. So, we're on to chapter 6, and that will be part 9. I'll be in part 9, chapter 6. And the title of chapter 6, since we're there already, I'll give you the title. It's called The Herb Pantagruelion. The Herb Pantagruelion. Pantagruel. Oh yeah, it's interesting. So yeah, not gonna read anymore. Ahead. Close up. Well, y'all have a good evening, good night, blessings to you. Hope you enjoyed chapter 5 of Cannabis, a History. Good old Martin Booth. Not perfect writer, compiler, but pretty darn good anyway. So, y'all have a good night, and I'll see you in the next part.